Okay, sorry, I cut off. So there would have been um, electromagnetic waves of a certain spectrum, like 520 nanometers, for example. But I don't think there would have been the color green, because I think the color green requires there to be a being that's capable of seeing it. So there would have been potential color, but no actual color, because actual color is a thing that is actually seen. And if there's no eyeballs on Earth, if there's just trees, and if there's no beings that have eyeballs or the power of sight, I don't think there's really green. There's not actually green. There's only potentially green. So that shows that that beings with sense, that beings with a sensitive soul, do contribute something to nature that would not be there without them. And I think that seems intuitive to me, that animals add something to nature, and that nature is not just a bunch of stuff everywhere just kind of bumping into each other. That there is something that when an animal exists, there's something that's new there in nature that wasn't there before. Okay, not just a particular arrangement of particles, but a thing that this animal is capable of doing that was not able to be done without or before that animal. Okay. So what does that tell us about? So number 18, does it make a sound? Well, it makes a potential sound, but maybe not an actual sound. What does this tell us about man's place in the world? But not just man's, any animal's place in the world. It tells us that without the animal that's capable of hearing, those sensible or seeing or whatever, all those sensible forms remain unactualized. Okay. So that's sort of the contribution of sensitive souls. Now, 19 and so number 20 is basically the same thing. How does perception cause the actualization of forms in the world? So perception, if by that you mean sense perception, we just described it. It actualizes the forms by taking something that is capable, that's able to be seen, and making it actually seen. That's how it actualizes these sensible forms. Now, that's number 20. Now, what about 19? There's something special about the human being, too. So now let's go back to nutrition. And this is actually number 21. How are nutrition, sensation, and intellect different forms of unity with the world? And also kind of actualization, but let's talk about both of them. Nutrition, I could eat something to illustrate. Well, I have water, okay? So how does nutrition work? This water is form and matter, okay? I'm taking both the form and matter of the water, and nutrition means I'm going to make it me, right? So I'm passively receiving it, and in a little while, and you can argue about when it actually becomes a part of me, but at some point, maybe when it goes to the stomach lining, the water is going to become Father Andy. So now I am unified. I have now made the two things, me and this water, to just be one thing, just me. That's how nutrition works. Okay. Sensation is a kind of unity because the form that is outside of you, the sensible form that is outside of you, you absorb, you receive passively and become one with it, but you also actualize it as a sensible form. So I'm actualizing the water not as water, it's water without me, but I'm actualizing the water as a form of nutrition. I'm making the water to actually be a nourishing thing. Now, the water doesn't care either way, obviously. Just like the green photon bouncing off of the tree doesn't care if it's ever seen. It's not like it has this, oh man, I really hope somebody sees me someday. And like we could feel sad for a photon, a light wave that comes all the way from the sun. It takes 8 minutes for sunlight to get to the earth, and then it just falls somewhere and nobody ever sees it, and that's the end of the life of that photon. We're not supposed to. We don't have to feel sorry for that thing, that it's never actualized by being seen. However, the fact is, water is capable of being nourishment, and it can be nourishment, and it is being actualized. The sensible sensation, similarly. Now, it's not like the photon goes into my brain; it just hits my retina, and its job is done. But again, it becomes part of something sensed. Now, what about the intellect? What is the intellect able to do that the senses aren't able to do? The intellect perceives not sensible forms, but forms themselves. Through the intellect, I don't just see the green of the tree, or even the height of the tree, or a sort of sensible-ish things like that. Through the intellect, working with the senses, or through the senses, I can actually understand what a tree is. I can understand its form itself. And when that happens, when my intellect receives, and this is a very kind of complicated thing we're going to talk about if you take epistemology, but when the intellect eventually, what's called the passive intellect, eventually receives the form of the being that you're studying when you're doing science, that intelligible form, what does intelligible mean? It means understandable. That understandable form becomes actually understood. Okay. Now, again, there's a long process of how that sort of is supposed to come about. But the intellect is actualizing not just a sensible form, but an intelligible form. Now, let me kind of translate this. Now we're back to the beauty of the trees, not just the green, but beauty as somehow related to structure and proportion, organization. And yet again, the tree doesn't care if I ever understand it or not. However, isn't it kind of a waste of a universe to have a universe where there's so much that is able to be perceived and understood and appreciated, and there's no being in the entire universe without a human being? There's no human being that's capable of perceiving all of the order that's there. And because it really is there. And yet if it's there, if order is there and it's never understood, it's sort of unactualized in its orderly aspect. Because order is something that can be noticed by an intellect. Now again, God is always there sort of noticing the world, so he's actualizing things in a totally different way because he's creating them by knowing them and loving them. But it's there and it's created. And apart from the intellect of God, isn't it kind of a waste? There's all this capable stuff that's capable of being understood, and our mind is capable of understanding it. That puts the human being in a very special place when it comes to creation. Why is the universe complete without man? Because without the human being, as far as maybe there's aliens that are intellectual too, that'd be fine. But without some being like that, capable of perceiving and knowing all the knowability, all that is knowable in the world, everything that is knowable is only knowable. It's able to be known, but it's not actually known. It's potentially known. It's intelligible, but it's not intellected. It's not understood. It's understandable, but not understood. And that shows that there's a potency that's there that would never be actualized. That's truly there in nature. That would never be actualized without the human intellect to actualize it. Okay? That's why the universe is incomplete without man. According to Aristotle, again, you see this in various parts of Book 3. So now this last thing, if the hand is the instrument of instruments, how is the soul the form of forms? Let me actually find a passage to read here for you. The whole thing about the active and passive intellect, you can see it around page 72. There's a whole thing about the imagination, which is pretty important, but not for this class. What error is thinking. There's an interesting argument about the intellect being immaterial on page 80. What's an argument that the intellect is immaterial? On page 80 towards the bottom, he has this really interesting observation that all the senses which use an organ get worn out with a very intense object. So if you look at a very bright thing, or if you try to see when it's really sort of dark out, your eye is going to get strained because the organ, the matter of the organ, just isn't, gets worn out. Whereas with the intellect, according to Aristotle, and there might be more to say about this, but Aristotle makes this claim that when you understand something, when you have an aha moment, like, oh, some deep thing that you never understood before, your mind doesn't get tired, it actually gets exhilarated. It's actually more capable of thinking about like dumber stuff after you have an eye-opening like epiphany moment. And for him, that's a kind of reason to believe that maybe the intellect doesn't operate merely through an organ. Now, the brain certainly is the organ to some degree of at least the imagination. But maybe the intellect itself, which grasps these concepts, maybe there's something kind of immaterial about that. And Aristotle sort of suggests that in various parts of Book 3. part 4 and part 5. And then there's a spot, you might be able to find it, where he says, well, maybe the soul is like the captain of a ship. He has these little suggestions that maybe there's some aspect of the soul that's immortal. Though, in general, I don't think he believes that we're going to live on after we die. Aristotle, I don't think he has that belief. Okay, so go to page 87. Again, there's tons and tons of stuff to say in this about this book, but I don't want to make this into a commentary on the De Anima. There's greater minds that have done that than I. So go to page 87. It follows, so this is the second paragraph from the bottom. Actually, let me build up to this. Part 8 at the top. Let us now summarize our results about the soul and repeat that the soul is, in a way, all existing things. That's kind of a crazy claim. The soul is all existing things, for existing things are either sensible or thinkable. And knowledge is, in a way, what is knowable, and sensation is, in a way, what is sensible. In what way we must acquire. So, he doesn't mean that the soul, he's not like a pan-soulist, pan-psychist, that everything is soul, or your soul is everything. He's not trying to be like some weird sort of hippie religion kind of thing. He's saying, when your soul knows a thing, when your intellect knows something, your intellect actually kind of becomes that thing somehow. What do you mean becomes? In a way. The word to stress here is in a way. I don't actually become a tree when I'm thinking about a tree. But remember that my intellect is a passive and receptive thing. So just like the wax that doesn't really have its own shape, I mean, it's sort of a blob, before you press that thing into it and it takes on that shape, then the wax just takes the shape of that thing. It is a heart, in a way. It is that seal. The intellect, because it's receptive in that way, becomes the thing that it knows. It becomes the thing that it knows in a way. It doesn't stop being an intellect. But because in itself, it's not really anything. In fact, there's a very important spot, I might as well point this out to you, on page 82, that the intellect is, about 10 lines down, the intellect is said to be like, it's like a writing tablet on which nothing actually stands written. This is exactly what happens with the mind. The mind is a blank tablet, a tabula rasa, okay, a blank chalkboard. That's how Aristotle understands the intellect. The intellect is absolutely receptive. It's not really a thing in itself. It is pure receptivity. In a sense, it's pure intentionality, if you remember what intentionality is. It really is nothing other than the thing that it's sort of pointing to, or knowing or absorbing. Okay, and that's kind of what ideas are sort of the result of this absorption of the mind. Okay, now, and again, these things that are out in the world are capable of being absorbed in that way. They're able to be understood. And the intellect, there's also this thing called the active intellect, which makes this a little bit more complicated. But the active intellect is the thing that actually makes those potentially knowable forms to be knowable. That's a more complicated story. I'm not going to get into that in this class. But back to page 87. So everything in this world to some degree is knowable. And if the intellect is the thing that is able to know them, and if the thing that makes them knowable is their form, that's a whole premise that I don't have the time to explain. You just sort of have to take that on faith, right? Now there's a whole story about why form is the thing that's knowable rather than matter. You can actually read part of my dissertation if you're interested in that, and you have a death wish. But if form is the thing that's knowable in the world, and the intellect is the thing that is capable of knowing, that means, go a few lines down to the next paragraph. Third paragraph of part 8 on 87. It follows that the soul is analogous to the hand. For as the hand is a tool of tools, so the mind is the form of forms, and sense the form of sensible things. How is the intellect the form of forms, if the hand is the instrument of instruments? What on earth does that mean? Let me just explain this, and then we'll talk about it more in class. This highlighter is a tool. Okay. Now, what is a tool? A tool is something that can perform. So a highlighter is a thing that can put whatever orange, pinkish orange ink on a paper, right? However, this is a thing that can put orange ink on a paper, right? If I just put it down, is it putting ink on the paper? No, it's not doing squat. It's just sitting there. My hand is the thing that is actualizing this tool. It's actually making it to be a tool. I'll prove it to you. I'm going to actually do this. So right now, see, I did it. The thing that this thing could do as a tool, my hand actually made it to do. So it's not really, it's not actually a tool. It's potentially a tool until I actually use it. Okay. So again, it's about actualization and potentiality. This could potentially put an orange mark on a piece of paper. It can't actually do that without my hand. So my hand is the instrument of instruments because it makes instruments to actually be instruments. The hand is the instrument of instruments because it makes instruments to actually be instruments, rather than just a bit of plastic and some ink sitting on a desk. My hand makes this to be the thing that can write an orange line. And same thing with a hammer and so on with all kinds of other tools. In fact, a clock tells time when you look at it. When you're not looking at it, it's just a bunch of crap kind of moving around in the back of the room. Like that one right there. When you look at it, you are actualizing its possibility, its potentiality to tell time. But it's not telling, it can't tell time unless somebody's looking at it to tell time with. Then you're actually making it a clock. Otherwise, it's just potentially a clock. It's just kind of just a thing kind of sitting back there. And then I can look and say it is, 3 p.m.-ish, 3:02. Now I was actualizing it as a clock. Right now, it's just potentially a clock again. You guys see that? I don't want to, don't like let this keep you up. And you know what? Let this keep you up at night. It's an interesting topic. So now what about the soul? How is the soul or the mind the form of forms? So the hand makes the instrument to actually be an instrument. The mind, when it knows something out in the world, it makes the form of that thing that's known, the form of that tree. That tree could be known. Not that tree. Trees could be known. It is the mind that makes that thing that could be known to actually be known. Just like the hand makes the thing that could write to actually write, the mind makes that thing that could be known to actually be known. And one of the things that forms are is knowable. One of the essential really attributes of the form of a being in the world, it doesn't just make something to actually be. It also makes that thing to be knowable. Form, actuality, and knowability are all on the same spectrum for Aristotle. They all are really neatly tied together. So, but though the form of the tree makes it to actually be a tree, it doesn't need me to acknowledge it to be a tree, but it needs an intellect to know it to be known. And without an intellect to know it, that aspect of form, which is knowable, would always go unactualized. Okay, so all of these are sort of connected to each other. All these questions about, man being the sort of completion of the world and so on, similar to Genesis, by the way. Something interesting about that parallel. Okay, I think that's it. Again, unfortunately, there's tons to say about this book, and all of it's pretty interesting. But for next class, we're going to talk about Aquinas. And so good luck with that reading. And I think 2 weeks on Aquinas, and then we'll be getting ready for the midterm after that. All right. I will see you when I see you. Peace out.